Do your Microsoft Teams meetings go a little bit like this? What's this meeting about?
Has anyone actually got an agenda?
I wasn't here for the last meeting, I was on holiday. What did you talk about?
I think that was an action for Dave to complete.
It wasn't an action for me. That was for Debbie.
Right, thanks for a great meeting, everyone. See you again, same time next week.
What if I told you that there was a better way to plan, organise and review your Microsoft Teams meetings? You can now supercharge your Microsoft Teams meetings by using Microsoft Loop, and that is a topic for today's video. But before we jump into the content, just a quick intro. My name is Jonathan Edwards, aka the Bearded 365 Guy. I help businesses all over the world with their Microsoft 365. Check me out at bearded365guy.com. Okay, let's get stuck into the content. So, what do you do to prepare for a Microsoft Teams meeting? I assume that you need to create an agenda that everybody can see in advance of the meeting. Well, how can you do that with Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Loop? Let me show you. Okay, I am logged into my test Microsoft 365 tenancy. So all the users that you can see down here are completely made up. Now, I'm logged into Microsoft Teams, and I'm logged in as a user called Fred Finance. So what Fred's going to do to start with is going to go over to his calendar, and he's going to create a new meeting. Now, this new meeting is for the weekly finance meeting. So I'll add a title now, and then I'm going to invite Ellie Executive. Now, all I've done so far just looks a little bit like creating a new Teams meeting. So where does Loop come into this? Well, towards the bottom of the meeting, you can see here I can add an agenda. So if I do that, you can see Loop starts to kick in. And it gives me something called a Loop component. Now I've got an agenda, I've got meeting notes, and I've got follow-up tasks. So what I'm going to do now is just fill out this agenda. Okay, I've got my basic agenda, but I can do so much more. I can loop, pardon the pun, people into these agenda items. So review credit control, well, that's me, that's going to be Fred, so I can put his name there. Again, Fred's going to look here at the sales invoices. But we're going to ask Ellie to look at the cash position. She has the bank logon details after all, so I'll add Ellie in there. Now you can see here I've added Ellie, but at the minute Ellie doesn't have access to this component. So I can simply click on here and I can share and notify. And what I'll do, I'll leave this review purchases just as it is. Now the next thing I'm going to do is just send this meeting invite. Okay, now let's jump over to Ellie Executive's mailbox. Okay, Ellie Executive has got a couple of emails. Firstly, we've got an email with the component in saying that Fred has mentioned you in the Loop component. That is because we gave a permission over this agenda item. But if I just look at the meeting invite as well, this is just a normal Teams invite. But what happens if I just scroll down here? The Loop component is also here. But the beauty of this is it's completely collaborative. So what Ellie Executive can do is go into it and make changes. So she might want Fred to talk about the purchases, and she might want to add another item on the agenda, all from within the Teams invite. Now, if I go back over to Fred's Teams now, and I open this meeting up, you can see that Ellie's changes have been updated. These Loop components are completely collaborative, and you can add them in lots of places in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. For example, I could do this. I could go up to here, and I could copy that component. Now, perhaps Ellie hasn't seen this agenda on the bottom of a Teams invite. So I can go over to Fred's mailbox. I can send a new email to Ellie, put the subject, and this is asking Ellie to review the agenda. And then I simply copy that in, and the Loop component will be copied in. And I can send that email to Ellie, and Ellie will receive an email with a collaborative Loop component. Now, there might be occasions where you don't want people to view the agenda before the meeting itself. Now, that's possible as well. Going back to our weekly finance meeting Teams meeting, I can go to the Loop component and I can simply click on here. And that will cancel the ability for people to see the agenda. And when that meeting starts, I can then double click on here and the loop component will be visible again for all the people in the meeting. Okay, everybody now should be prepared for the meeting. But what happens during the meeting? How can you use Microsoft Teams and Loop to make your Teams meetings more successful? Let me show you. I've now joined the Teams meeting as Fred Finance. Now you can clearly see down the right hand side that my Loop component has appeared with all our agenda items. Now everybody on the meeting can see these notes. And what we can do is we can work our way through the agenda. We can review credit control. And when we've done that, we can simply click on here. We can review the sales invoices. And again, when that's done, we can click on here. And so forth and so forth. And what we can also do is add meeting notes. So what have we talked about in this meeting? Let me add some of those notes now. Okay, the meeting is progressing really well, and we've put some meeting notes in here. Now below that, there's another section called follow-up tasks. Now, with every Teams meeting, there's always some follow-up tasks. So we need to start adding tasks in here now. So I can click on here, and I can give the task a name. So we've created a follow-up task. Now, what I'm going to show you now, I think, is one of the great advantages of using Loop in Teams meetings. I can assign this task to someone. So actually, I'm going to assign it to myself. That's Fred Finance. I'm also going to give it a due date. That's going to pop up there. So that's due for tomorrow. Now let's add another task. Click on here and give the task a name. Okay, we've created that task, and this one needs to go to Ellie Executive. Okay, we'll give it a due date. That's due for next week, and we can put that in there. Now, the beauty of assigning people to these follow-up tasks is that these tasks sync with your Planner app in Microsoft 365. So if I just go over to here, open a new window, Planner's going to open, and you can see that the task assigned to Fred Finance has moved into my task list assigned to me. And the plan, that's the name of the meeting we had, the weekly finance meeting. And the same will have happened for Ellie as well when we assign the task to her. So no matter where the tasks are created within Microsoft 365, everything syncs back to your planner. Now, everything I've shown you so far, I'm sure you'll agree, is really useful. We've got an agenda, we've got meeting notes, we've got follow-up tasks. But sometimes in a meeting, we might need, well, a little bit more. So I've got an agenda item here to discuss the new website purchase. Now, Ellie, who's in charge of the company, wants me to break down this £25,000. She thinks it's a lot of money. So what I can do is open a chat. And once I've opened the chat, you can see here, here's the Loop logo. And if I click on there, I can create more Loop components. So for this, because Ellie wants to know the pricing, I can create a table. Now again, as I've discussed, this is just a test. So I can put a title into here and I can start filling in this table. Okay, I've completed this Loop component. So what I can also do, I can open this in a browser and there you can see the website project. Now I'm going to come back to this at the end of the video. As you can see, using Microsoft Teams and Loop together can make our Teams meetings incredibly successful. But what happens after our Teams meeting has finished? What happens if you've completely missed the meeting and you want to know what happens? How can we use Teams and Loop to our benefit to review previous meetings? Let me show you. Okay, the meeting is now over. So what do we do after the meeting is finished? Well, everybody who's been invited to the meeting still can look in their calendar and open the meeting up. And the Loop component will be still there, so they can review it that way. I can also go into the chat and I can see the table we created as well. So everything stays within that meeting. But what happens for these people who weren't invited to the meeting? How can they catch up on things? Well, here's a couple of decent tips. What I can do now is I can go and again copy this Loop component. And then what I've done here, I've got a Teams channel called the Finance Department. And in there, I've got a channel called Weekly Meetings. Now, this is a good tip. I can start a post, and what I can do is add a subject, and then I can simply copy that in there. And you can see the loop component is in there. So then I can post it like that. So anybody who is a member of this channel can go into here, they can look at the agenda, they can look at the meeting notes, and they can look up the follow-up tasks. And again, this loop component is fully collaborative. So as I complete my tasks, I can just tick them off in here. And again, that will sync back to my planner. What I can also do is copy the other loop component that we used. So I can go into the chat. I can copy this loop component here. And again, I can dump that in here. I can click on reply. I copy that loop component in there. And then everything is in this Teams channel. Now, finally, I just want to give you an extra tip. And this is all about using Loop Workspaces to keep all of your information together. Let me jump in and show you. Now, here's an extra tip. Now, all these Loop components go back, well, to Loop itself. So I'm logged into Loop here. It's loop.cloud.microsoft.com. So I've got a workspace called Finance Team. Now, if I go in there, we can do all kinds of things within the Loop workspace. Now, I've got a video on my YouTube channel all about Loop. But what I'm referring to here is if I go to recent components and pages, you can see here that some of my components are here. So I've got this website project table that we created. So I could add this, if I wanted to the Finance Team Loop workspace. So I'm back in the Finance Team workspace here, and this has now been added into here. So what this does, it just keeps all my information together. What I could also do, go back to Loop here, recent things here, and I could open the weekly finance meeting, and here you'll see my agenda. Very familiar. Again, I can think, well, I want this to be part of my Finance Team workspace. And again, here we are. So everything to do with my finance department, I can have right here within Loop. I can look at all my meetings. So I could have all my meetings down here, and I can easily review everything all within Microsoft Loop. Now, before I leave today, I just want to answer a couple of questions that I might get asked, and if you like, a couple of downsides of Microsoft Loop. Firstly, we can't involve external participants with Loop components. Now, I hope Microsoft are listening, because this, for me, is a major downside. So everything I've shown you today, you can only use internally. And secondly, there's always a question about backup and security. Now, these Loop components are just files, and they are usually stored in your OneDrive for Business, which prompts a couple of questions. What happens if someone deletes a Loop component? Or what happens when someone leaves your organization and the Loop components are still in their OneDrive for Business? Well, I can't emphasize enough that you should have a third-party backup of your Microsoft 365 data. Plus, if someone leaves your business, it doesn't mean they're taking the data with them. So you need to be more conscious of what you do when someone leaves your organization. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.